Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Dr. Jonathan Hanson. Jonathan, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So Jonathan is a consultant in sport and exercise medicine, and as we're going to go through, he's had a vast array of experience in things. So your LinkedIn profile, there's a lot of things that we can go through today. So I'm looking forward to having a chat about it.
Yeah, that's also could be said that I'm just old.
Well, we'll go with my version. I think it's better. So Jonathan, whereabouts are you from originally?
Yeah, so originally I'm from Barnsley in South Yorkshire. It's a poignant day for Barnsley with Michael Parkinson's passing yesterday. And I grew up in Yorkshire, went to school in that area, and then that's when I left to come to Scotland for uni when I was 18 to come to Aberdeen, and I've pretty much been in Scotland ever since, apart from the odd little job back in the north or overseas, but pretty much an honorary Scot.
Right. So what made you want to get into medicine in the first place, and then also why Aberdeen?
Yeah, well, the Aberdeen's easy. It's where I got an offer. Although I did have some family who were from Aberdeen or worked and lived in Aberdeen, so we'd been there a few times when I was younger. Although I'm from, Barnsley's quite an industrial ex-coal mining town, but there's countryside all around it, and I'm definitely a rural person, so pulled to sort of the rurality of the mountains anyway. But it was the only place I got an offer for medicine. My sort of interest in medicine comes from when I was a youngster. I've kind of combined sport and medicine, emergency medicine, since I was about 12 years old. Swimming was one of the sports when I was younger. The swimming club I was at had a life-saving club, so I was doing CPR and AED and all that sort of stuff when I was a teenager. Got a job as a pool lifeguard. So I was doing sport and emergency medicine in some form even before I started medical school. And then when at school, I was definitely interested in the sciences, but I was more biology and chemistry rather than maths and physics. And it was just a bit of a natural progression, really, to do medicine more through. I'm good at biology and chemistry, and I like working with people. The kind of sport thing, it was there, but I probably didn't discover it, and because it wasn't really a thing anyway to have a career in sport and medicine. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, until I got a bit further on.
Right. And so how was your time in Aberdeen?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, looking back, it's a bit crazy because I played a few sports. I was never a natural athlete in terms of track and field and all that sort of stuff, and anything you could measure on me from a sports science perspective. But I was fairly switched on about what I could do and what I couldn't do at sports. So I played 2 or 3 sports to a reasonable level. I played district age group rugby. I played school first team cricket for 3 years, district basketball at school. But without, I mean, if you see my park run now, honestly, you'll realize I'm definitely not an athlete. Anybody who watches me running, it's comedy. But whilst I was in Aberdeen, I was still playing rugby in Yorkshire, which looking back was a ridiculous thing to do. But the plus side to that was, so I basically did minimal training during the week, what I could do myself, and then would come down at the weekend and play for the club in Yorkshire that I'd played for all the way through. But the plus side for that was I got to see my parents a lot, despite living 6 hours away from where they were. And I got to be involved in a reasonable level, sort of national league, lower national league level of rugby union, which was great. But I'm at that window now when my son's 18 and about to go to uni, and thankfully he's only going to Edinburgh Uni, so he'll only be an hour away from where I live. But I've got that feeling of what did I put my parents through by moving 6 hours away 30 years ago.
Yeah. So how often would you make that trip down?
Pretty much during the rugby season, every weekend. Crazy. Yeah, a lot of time on the train. and probably missed out on a lot of things at uni actually through swings and roundabouts. I gained a lot through my sport, and then equally missed out on a few things as well. I mean, I suppose from a sports medicine side, I was lucky in that, like a lot of medical students do, I did an intercalated BSc halfway through the medicine degree. And Aberdeen, although for the rest of the UK it probably seems a bit out there and a bit on the edge, but Aberdeen was one of the first hubs where MRI was used clinically, and would say it was one of the leaders in Europe for developing MRI. And one of the radiologists there, a chap called Frank Smith, who's dead now, unfortunately, he was also a team doctor at Montrose Football Club. So whilst I was doing my BSc, he was my supervisor. My BSc was looking at tibial plateau geometry using MR to try and determine who would do well without an operation after an ACL rupture. And Frank was my supervisor from a radiology perspective. My supervisor from a clinical perspective was a chap called Nicola Mafouli, who's obviously in London now, but he was a registrar in Aberdeen. He did his orthopedic training up there. So, looking back, it's easy looking back, but these two guys that I was working with when I was a medical student are actually fairly big hitters in terms of the development of MRI. And obviously Nick Mafouli's gone on to do an awful lot of research around tendinopathy and Achilles type stuff. And obviously a big figure in London now. But the interesting thing there was that was my first taste of sports medicine, because Frank took me to a game at Montrose against Inverness Caley-Thistle. I remember it well. And that was a radiologist who would go into the changing room in his suit, of course, because in those days the docs sat in the director's box in their suits. But he was examining patients, examining players with the physios. So that was actually opened my eyes to, well, whatever you go into, you can always have breadth and you can always stay, general as a role as a generalist. So although I was doing a lot of my sport away, actually that BSc year probably built on that kind of interest that was bubbling away, that kind of sport and resource type thing that I'd had since I was a teenager. So again, I still didn't realize it, because sports medicine wasn't a career in the mid-90s, certainly not in Scotland and certainly not in the north of Scotland. So then it was all about just getting on to working as a doctor.
So did you have any other aspects beyond being a doctor?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, from the late 90s was the time when all the sort of videos started coming out on British and Irish Lions tours, and Living with the Lions and all that sort of stuff became a bit more high profile. Excuse me. So I was aware of people like James Robson, Dr. James Robson at Scottish Rugby Union, who is probably one of, if not the most influential person in my professional life. But I was aware of him as British and Irish Lions doctor. It is possible to do these sort of things, but only very few people get there. And what would that look like? How would it be possible? But it certainly was never an aspiration. It was just, oh, that's interesting. Medicine and sport together. That's a bit like I was just doing.
Yeah. So what was your involvement? Did you have anything with James at that point?
No, not at all. After on graduation, it was fine traveling down to Yorkshire when I was a medical student, but it wasn't fine as soon as I started working as a junior doctor. That became impossible. So I made a decision fairly quickly, about a year in, that I was going to stop trying to play rugby seriously, although it was only in lower national league, and I was going to play socially. And at that point, just focus on ticking the boxes that I needed to do to to advance professionally. So I only really met James Robson in about 2003. So a good sort of 5 years of a good 5 years of doing regular medical jobs. I did go to Australia for 6 months for a year, for Brisbane, as an SHO around the turn of the millennium. But it's only when I came back from that and I was starting work in Glasgow, and once my rugby career had kind of petered out, that I actually thought, right, I want to have a go at this sports medicine lark. And I contacted the Glasgow Warriors doctor at the time, who was a chap called Jerry Haggerty, in about 2002, 2003. And he let me shadow him for 4 or 5 games, and then said to me, well, we've got a Glasgow under-16 team. They only play 4 or 5 games a year. It's a representative team, play with the districts in Scotland. Do you fancy doing that? And I'll mentor you, which was great. So it's only when I'd done that with Jerry for a couple of years and Glasgow 16s, under 18s, the Scotland under 21 rugby job came up. And Jerry said to me, actually, I'm going to recommend you for this under 21 job. Would you be interested? And I said yes. So it was only then, at about 2003, that I was introduced to James Robson. And then he kind of, well, took me under his wing a bit and mentored me and gave me the tools, if you like.
And so where were you living at this point? And like, what were the jobs that you were doing as your day job?
Yeah, I missed this a little bit out. At the time of I started looking at Glasgow, there was a position advertised for the World University Games with Great Britain in a junior sports physician role. So I applied for that and managed to get it in South Korea for the World University Games. And there again, I met a whole host of practitioners, mostly who were not from Scotland. So the likes of Simon Till in Sheffield, Mark Gillette, and a lot of just Nicky Cambero. And there the conversation became, actually, sports medicine could become a career if we get the London 2012 Olympics. And I was sort of thinking, all right, could it be a career? I'm not sure it'd be a career in Scotland. So I definitely was, excuse me, choosing jobs on professional jobs, day jobs on what I enjoyed more than what I wanted to do. So I moved between a few jobs, between emergency medicine, general medicine, excuse me, cardiothoracic surgery, SHO jobs, just waiting to see what was going to happen with sports medicine training. And then once I was doing Scotland under 21s, completely randomly, I was at the stage in my hospital career where I couldn't tread water anymore. If I was going to stay in the city in Glasgow, I would have to kick on and choose a career. I knew general practice wasn't for me. That emergency medicine style background through my life-saving club was very prominent in my sort of interest. And like a lot of people who work in emergency medicine, I've got a very short attention span. So completely random, and this is where it sounds absolutely crazy, but my wife and I are both rural people, and there was a job advertised on the Isle of Skye, working in a rural hospital there as a complete rural generalist, that whatever happens, you have to deal with it from a hospital perspective. And I'd looked at this job a few times because it kind of pushed my professional buttons of having to deal with whatever's in front of you. And say we're rural people, so the rurality, it's a beautiful part of the world. And I needed something that would give me 2 or 3 years until sports medicine training became available. So we went to Skye, which we went for 2 or 3 years. We had our children there. My kids are Gaelic speakers. They went to Gaelic school, the traditional language in Scotland. And actually, I fell into the best job in the NHS in terms of complete generalist skills. Whatever happened, and we had some crazy interesting and some horrible things happen in the community that we had to deal with. So from my professional development, I was getting a lot out of that, in that we were well supported for CPD. That mantra of, you don't quite have the same resources that you have in the city, but you've got to cope with anything and everything that happens. They were ideal skills for traveling with teams, as I saw it, because that's what happens, isn't it? When you go away with a team, especially if you're overseas, anything can happen, and you need that flexibility in your thinking to be able to cope with it. So we ended up staying on Skye for 12 years, which wasn't the plan initially, although I did take a sabbatical halfway through to complete my top-up training in sports medicine in Newcastle and Belfast. And yeah, so by the time I finished on Sky, I was on the specialist register for sport and exercise medicine, and I was on the GP register as well, because just a quirk of the Sky job, they gave me the tools to give me a finishing ticket, which was a good safety net for me, because in Scotland it's not like the south of England in terms of formal pathways in sports medicine. So I had a good safety net via having those two qualifications.
Right. What was it like for Sky?
Amazing, amazing. Just the sense of community that happens in the villages and the towns, that thing of knowing multiple generations of families, socially. It's almost an idyll, really, just of what life should be like and what could be like. My drive to work, sometimes I would stop on the drive to work in the morning just to take in the views and remind myself how lucky I was. Just the smell of the air, how clean it was, the crazy things like one Christmas we you can imagine there's no light pollution in some of the villages. We came home one evening from wherever we'd been, and walking up to the steps, it's pitch black, and I hear this rustling. What's that? That's a bit strange. Get a bit closer, and there's two lobsters in a plastic bag left on our doorstep, and they were hand dived by the postman, who does that for everyone at Christmas. Just little things like that. And my kids had a great rock pool childhood, bilingual childhood. So my kids are almost grown up now, but they've got friends for life from Sky. We've got friends for life. The population in the winter is relatively small, perhaps 25,000. We were 2 hours away from the nearest district general hospital. The team is very tight. We back each other up, support each other. But in the summer, there'll be 250,000 people come through Skye, because it's such a beautiful place. The majority of them would come to climb mountains in flip-flops, and I'm being flippant, but you know what I mean. They would get caught out by the conditions or whatever. So there was quite actually, or they would be overseas tourists who would be on narrow single-track roads looking at the mountains, forget which side of the road we drive on. So actually, it was a really busy job, especially in the summer. And the other great thing about it was they completely supported me in my sports medicine thing. So because we did 12-hour shifts, I could easily create a week, 10 days to disappear to go and do some sport, do some sports medicine. And during that time, I did stuff for British Athletics with World Mountain Running. I did the holding camp for the Beijing Olympics with Team GB. I did all the Scotland under-21 rugby, Scotland A rugby. But the thing I found as I got a little bit older, into my 40s, it was great flying back to Edinburgh Airport from a trip abroad at 10 o'clock at night. But then, of course, I'd got a 5-hour drive home to get to Skye. And that ultimately was not going to get any easier. So that was our kind of decision. It's time to leave Skye, and it's time to move back to the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh, where we live now.
And so what were you moving to?
Apologies, muted myself. That was always the challenge, because sports medicine was not as developed in Scotland as perhaps in other parts of, or not as many opportunities as down south, and we wanted to stay in Scotland. And thankfully, there was a job at the Institute of Sport, the Scottish Institute of Sport, advertised for a part-time sports medicine role, sports medicine doctor role, with Niall Elliott, and I applied for that and got it. So we moved to Stirling, or near Stirling, and I commuted a little bit, doing part-time on Skye, part-time in Stirling, until I managed to get an emergency medicine job at an NHS hospital in Fife. And again, I've been so lucky with the people I've worked with. I don't know about your professional life, but somebody said to me just this week, that the quality of the relationships and the people you work with are everything in sports medicine and in medicine, in work. And that's probably one of the huge things I've learned from I know you've interviewed James Robson, but James Robson's biggest, and lots of other people I've worked with, but James in particular, his biggest selling point is he's a good person, and he values people and treats people like human beings no matter what's happening. And obviously in performance sports, sometimes you can hear stories how that's people feel the stress more than remember the values. But every job I've done, I've been so lucky in that the values have managed to shine through in the teams that I've worked with, and I'm very lucky.
Yeah, I think it's very important to reflect, even if you were
if you
saying
would say
before about
before
when you
about when
drive
you drive
the
the
sky.
sky,
It's like sometimes I've got to
I've got to
stop and
stop
think,
and think
actually,
actually
those are
do
great
the
things,
great
not just always the
things.
stresses or whatever else is going on. So how long were you at SIS for then?
Still there. So I'm still there, yeah. Though I've reduced my hours significantly to accommodate a role in Formula One this year with Hinsa. But I'm still there with the Institute, and that's been 6 years now. I went from being half-time to just doing one clinic a week for them. Just one of the things about sports medicine in Scotland, because we don't have a formal training scheme, and we used to have, but unfortunately it folded, although we're trying to do something about that now. So the next generation, we've got a responsibility. I was taken on by the likes of Jerry Haggerty, James Robson, and many others. We've got a responsibility to develop the next generation. So there's a little bit of trying not to leave people high and dry and trying to mentor the next generation coming through, which we are doing both through the Warriors and Glasgow Warriors and through the Institute.
And then I saw that you used to work at the FA as well.
Yeah. So so again, I said I met Mark Gillette at the World University Games, and in my early career, Mark Gillette was another great ally. And one of Mark's big projects was the Remo course, the first UK-based sort of pitch-side emergency course that everybody would recognise as standard now. And many people on that course, myself included, then went on to write their own courses for different sports. So Andy Smith and Simon Kemp at the RFU, myself. And so through that, I wrote a course called Scrum Caps for Scottish Rugby Union, medical, cardiac, and pitchside skills, a pitchside trauma course like everybody would be familiar with. But the thing about the Scrum Caps, we quite early on got a high profile incident, which I can talk about, where Tom Evans, the Scotland winger, broke his neck on field during a Six Nations match against Wales, and on pitch was paralysed. But again, through the skills that all the courses teach, the way he was handled, the way he was managed, from immediately when the incident happened right through to when he got to hospital, he actually didn't have any cord damage when everything was sorted out in terms of reducing his fracture. So Tom exceptionally lucky, but it was our kind of Fabrice Mwamba incident, if you like, for Scrum Caps. And similarly, because I knew Mark, I worked with Mark at another World University Games in 2007. Mark took the the area course, which was the course that superseded Remo. He wrote it for the Premier League in the late noughties. And then Mark wanted to give it up. So he recommended me to the FA to take it on for the FA. So that's what we did. Rather than the Premier League, we had the FA. Because as soon as we started doing that, literally within weeks with Ian Beasley, the Fabrice Mwamba incident happened, which suddenly meant that the course exploded from being Premiership first teams to Premier League first teams to all 92 clubs, which suddenly became massive and clearly needed a lot more than an interested sports doctor on Sky could provide. So it rapidly grew, and we put other people in. But that was where my relationship with the FA started. And again, through being prominent in Scottish rugby around immediate care and trying to lobby World Rugby to take immediate care on. Got involved in some of the concussion stuff. And so my FA involvement team wise was in 20, I want to say 2017, I think. Yeah, 2017, where out of the blue I got a call saying that there were going to be a new team being set up, medical team being set up for the senior men with England. And one of the things they really wanted to look at was around head injury and the immediate care stuff, about the non-technical stuff, the communication type stuff, and would I be interested in being involved in that? So obviously, when you get that sort of call, it's not a difficult decision. Said yes, absolutely, and again, so lucky. Great environment, great people. Steve Kemp, Rob Chack, Bryce Kavanagh, Ben Rosenblatt. Carl Todd. What a guy. Great people, and had a great experience. That I stayed with the senior men's team for basically a qualifying cycle for the Russia World Cup. Went to the Russia World Cup with them, and then did a year afterwards with the Nations League when they got to the semis of the Nations League. And then it's just a natural thing that my bit of the project came to an end, and then moved on from that. But it was, again, just another, a bit like the F1 stuff, just another random experience. You sometimes, a bit like driving home from Sky, you sort of sit there and think, how did that happen? What am I doing here? And it was the same with the FA job, with the England senior men's job. Again, that stands out. I've done some amazing stuff. I would have said the World Mountain Running was one of my best things I've done, just because the athletes are beasts and the scenery is brilliant, but they're not famous athletes. They're the people that have the 32-minute to 10K, not the 31-minute. So they're never going to be high profile, but they're beasts. But that England men's campaign at the World Cup in Russia blows away everything else I've done. It's been crazy, and I've done a few Olympics, which have been amazing as well. But that England senior men's experience in Russia and getting to a World Cup semi-final, coming from my perspective, from a standing start, blows everything away that I've done.
So in what way particularly? Obviously the results were amazing. The tournament itself was unbelievable. That summer was amazing. But like, what was it in particular that was so incredible?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned people and values. Gareth Southgate, completely authentic how he comes across on the TV. That's how he deals with everyone. That set the tone. The people I was working with, I had no perception. I'd never worked in a high value sport like that before. So I didn't know what to expect. And yes, there are high value aspects of it, charter flights out and things like that. But as soon as you strip away that, yeah, the players were all great. They were all decent people. The staff were all decent people. Going to a place like Russia, when would you get, especially in the current climate? Obviously, you're not going to, but just how many people get to go to a football World Cup to the later stages? In the UK, there are not many. How many people get to go on a sports tour to Russia? Not many. Just the performance angle as well, just the level of detail professionally that people have thought about things, and things that I learnt professionally, to take away elsewhere, and hopefully a feeling that I contributed a bit as well, with some of my stuff around the non-technical stuff and the communication, and how to minimize error in medical decision making, and excuse me, trying to introduce an on-field concussion assessment, trying to standardize an on-field concussion assessment for football, just to try and make it less of a random process. So hopefully, hopefully they feel I had some influence with them as well.
Yeah, I saw at the weekend that saw Matt Konopinski put something out that the one of the Tottenham players had an incident, and the manager was very supportive of it. So where do you think we're at in terms of concussion in football, and in sport in general?
Yeah, I mean, each sport is different. One of the other roles I've got is I'm the chair of the government advisory group for Scotland for sports concussion. Every sport is different and in a different place, and probably has different challenges. I think if rugby's obviously gets a lot of airtime and a lot of attention about head injury, and I would say with my emergency medicine hat on, the majority of the head injuries that we see are not related to sport. We see loads of head injuries, but they're all alcohol, falls, violence. So I think it's important we don't get completely pigeonholed about sport and concussion, because there's a lot of young people being bashed over the head on a Friday night as well. But rugby gets a lot of airtime about its approach to head injury. But one of the things which has definitely made a big difference, speaking as a practitioner who has to actually assess these players and make a decision in rugby, is the off-field assessment. Having the chance to remove someone to a quiet environment, get them to calm down, and actually do some form of evidence-based assessment, even if we know that concussion could take up to 72 hours to appear, symptoms of concussion, having that chance to take them off field. I know when I go on to a rugby player and I'm looking at an ankle injury or knee injury, there is pressure, there is time pressure to you only get a brief functional assessment, and you are sort of watching them afterwards. To have that in football where you can't do the off-field assessment yet, I mean, that's got to be the next step that football looks at. Can they find a way to accept that they need to do an off-field assessment would be better for the player than an on-field assessment? You get the comments there by the Tottenham manager, obviously, who came from Scotland, so maybe some Scottish medics had some influence on him. Which is obviously a breath of fresh air, to hear someone saying that doesn't happen very often, but it does show that the direction of change is happening. And hopefully that comments like that and instances like that are game breakers where other people will follow. But I get it. It's that level of high performance sport. These decisions that coaches are trying to make around players are difficult and important for results. But the messaging's really easy. The messaging that we give to our players are, if you've got a concussion, how can you be an effective team player in a team sport when your decision making is reduced and you won't appreciate it? So it's just about persisting with that education, persisting with that change management, and getting people to accept that. They're not going to players and coaches are not going to accept if you have two head injuries together. You might get this really rare complication called second impact syndrome, which could be fatal. Because again, 21-year-olds think they're invincible, but they might listen to, actually, you're not going to be effective to your team. Your performance might suffer, and you may not get selected in future weeks because the coach, doesn't rate your performance, or you're 7 times more likely to get a musculoskeletal injury if you continue when you're concussed. At grassroots level, if that's somebody who's a painter and decorator and they pull a hamstring, or if that's anybody who pulls a hamstring, that's a nuisance. It's a few weeks. But if you rupture your ACL, then you're looking at probably 9 months out of the sport. So it's definitely a journey. Different sports are at different stages, but comments like that in football are really refreshing and showing that we're going in the right direction. I think the biggest thing that came in while I was working in both sports, football and rugby, was the video mechanism, the video reviews. Although as soon as you add complexity in technology, you add complexity in decision making. So you've got to try and put non-technical processes in to simplify the process and not get too involved in overcomplicating it. But just having video review, because like everybody knows, if you're working in sport, you're sitting pitch side, you're looking at something that's 50 meters away once in real time. You might just turn to speak to the person next to you. You might take a drink. You might look at your shoelace, and you've missed it. And yet around the world, there are multiple TV replays who can show that 50 times before you've seen it again once if you're working pitch side. So some great advances in football, and and people like Andy Massey at FIFA, really it's helping drive change, and a welcome addition to this kind of process of pushing things further on with the video and the hopefully get towards a position of off-field assessment for them at some point.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And then you mentioned about the Olympics. Then talk to me about your experiences with that.
Yeah. So again, I did World University Games 2003 as a junior, World University Games in Thailand in 2007 as a kind of a middle doctor in HQ. And then you've always got to, when these opportunities come up, you've just got to just throw your hat in the ring and see what happens. And in 2008 for Beijing, excuse me, I applied. I did not think that I was on Sky at this time. I did not think that a doctor from Sky, who's done a couple of World University Games and was not a GP, was not a specialist, was kind of a doctor in training, but working in a weird job on Sky. I did not think I would get to go to the Olympic Games. So I was mainly putting an application in, hoping that by the time London came round, I would be in a good position. Although I was part of the, I was known to some of the people already. I knew some familiar people who subsequently did get on. So I applied for Beijing and I was interviewed, and my pitch for the interview was all about the holding camp, was, generalist skills. Like I've said, generalist skills, whatever happens, I can cope with anything that comes on. I can be a good filter, I can be a good buffer. And randomly they liked it. So I was there. But the people who were in the Olympic Village were, some of the big hitters in sports medicine in the UK, so the likes of Rod Jake, Charlotte Cowie, Pippa Bennett. They were all in Beijing, and I was in Macau. I'd never heard of Macau before I went, but obviously, I don't know if you've been to Macau or familiar with it, but it's the Las Vegas of the Far East. So I was in a casino town, in a beautiful hotel, working with Olympic athletes 3 days after I'd been working on the Isle of Skye. So yeah, strange world. And then so when London 2012 came around, I had a brilliant experience in Macau. Wanted to do some more. When London 2012 came around, I wasn't eligible to apply because they made the rules that you had to be part of the Institute network to get a job in 2012. So that was fine. And then when Rio came around in 2016, I just got onto the Institute job, and we just moved away from Sky to come down here. And then James Moore was involved. And again, my sort of pitch there was, I'd done a lot of the mountain running stuff to remote and rural. I'd done a lot of long haul travel with sport to the World Junior Games across Beijing, Thailand. And again, so my pitch was my emergency medicine experiences, my immediate care experience, my global travel, my generalizable skills, and they liked it. So I was on as one of the HQ doctors, but the way Rio was set up, it was all in campuses, if that's a word, plural for campus. And I was given the Diodoro campus to look after, which basically fits with the remote and rural Sky model of, in Diodoro, there was the equestrian, there was the BMX. So there's basically potential for big emergency medicine style trauma injuries, but slightly out of the way from the rest of the village. That Sky thing of being comfortable, being able to cope with whatever happened. Did it, and again, same thing. The people and the values make everything. I had a great experience, and again learned a lot and worked with some new practitioners I'd not worked with before. And then definitely wanted to have a crack at Tokyo when that came around. That gave me 3 more years in the institute setup to become embedded in that. So I was probably less of a outlier in terms of my skill mix and experience for working within the institute network and getting to an Olympic Games. So I did the Gold Coast Commonwealth for Scotland in between, and then the Tokyo Olympics, which obviously was delayed for a year by COVID. And I did the same spectrum of applying my skill mix, which is the emergency medicine stuff for the horses and the bikes principally. But again, in that role, one of the key things that gets you in the room and the key things you have to do is whatever happens, you've got to do it. You've got to, whether that's helping shift bags, move ice baths, whatever it is, you've just got to have that outlook of one team, we're doing it.
So that is quite interesting. I've never really thought about that before. But when you're going for these, you're applying for a role in like an Olympic Games, for example, what is it? An actual application form? What is the process?
Yeah, I mean the Olympic roles are advertised just on like any other job. Olympic and Paralympic roles are all just an open advert on the usual UK sport websites, BOA websites, government websites, faculty websites. Just a straightforward open application. And in the past, they've been application form, CV, interview. More recently, they've moved to a bit more sort of psychological input, so group interviews and seeing how you interact as a team. Because obviously the skills that they need is, you're in a pressure cooker for 4 to 6 weeks. You can be a long way from home. Some interesting things can happen, and by that I mean, you need it's not, things happen where you can't sort of say, oh, we need we'll take 2 weeks off and we'll come back next week and we'll build you up again. We'll just deload, reload and see what happens. You've got situations where people are trying to compete, so you've got to find obviously legal but novel solutions within science and medicine and just sport about how can we minimize the impact of this problem to make sure this person competes effectively. So that's what they do. They get people working together and see how they interact and how they solve problems, more than the traditional. Well, recently that's how it's been, rather than the traditional sort of interview type, panel interview type role.
And who have you been interviewed by in those?
Well, Ian McCurdy was who was the chief medical officer for the Beijing Olympics back in the day, and then I've had interviews with Charlotte Cowie, Greg Retta, Niall Elliott. They all sort of sit on the panels. James Moore around the Rio cycle. It's usually science and medicine practitioners or the performance staff of the BOA or the organisation that you're applying for. I've had head coaches, I've had physios interview me, I've had all sorts of people.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And then how's the F1 role come up?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Again, like I say, just strange things happen. So through the scrum cap stuff, and as I mentioned, I've got a bit of a short attention span. I'm great at conceptualizing projects, getting them running, but I'm never going to run something for 20 years. I just haven't got the attention span for that. I get distracted to other things. And through the scrum caps work, where we were training, and the FA stuff and the area course, we were training people to do basic airway maneuvers, log rolls, CPR, all that sort of carry on. And that was fine, but yeah, it ran its course for me. That type of training, and in emergency medicine, as I became more senior in hospital medicine, a lot of the focus there is about error minimization. We know what to do, but as soon as you throw a group of people together in a stressful moment, how can you guarantee that they are going to do the correct thing and not just deteriorate into chaos? And that's all this ergonomics and human factors type stuff, about how do humans interact to get the best outcome and where do errors occur. So I developed my interest, then moved to that, and I started bringing that into scrum caps and the area course. And it's really simple stuff like, we can teach people how to use pieces of plastic and airways on people's faces, or how to use a defibrillator. But that's completely pointless if when you go to use the bag that you've got, all your equipment's out of date, or things are missing, or somebody's opened it and not replaced it. So it's just systems-based stuff of packing, bag checks, minimizing work, locking the bags after you've checked them and labeling them as checked, just so that it's there when you need it. That one time a year you're going to need it. That the battery's in date and everything's going to be there, as well as the simple stuff about how we interact. So on field, and again, I'm coming to answer your question, I promise, but on field with rugby, we certainly at Glasgow Warriors, we try and do a 2-person rescue to every incident. One person assesses, the other person watches the assessment and communicates what's happening to the coaches so they can get a substitute. But the language around that, and this all comes from helicopters, and again, working on Sky, working with the helicopter docs, 3-point messaging. There's no point going, I'm with Johnny, number 6. He's pulled his hamstring. We're just testing strength and range. That is pointless. That's going to get lost in noise. People are going to be thinking about someone else. But if you come in and go, Fred Bloggs, hamstring, red, basically using a red, amber, green system, 3-point messaging, make it simple. Everybody knows where they stand. There's no chatter, no noise on the radio. So that's that human factors and ergonomics that we tried to bring into other sports that I've been working in. And through my interest in that, I was looking at other sports of, what do you do about accuracy of decision making and precision in decision making? Because working pitch side in team sports, there's an expectation that you'll be 100% accurate in every decision you make, but you're making a brief on the run functional assessment with a large audience and a large TV audience sometimes. So what can you do to stack the odds in your favor? And motorsport was a sport that I tried to approach a few times through teams, individual teams, to try and find what they do about accuracy and precision, because obviously from the outside it's got an image of being incredibly precise and incredibly marginally gains orientated. And I didn't really get anywhere in terms of having a meaty conversation with anyone, but it was always on my radar. And then randomly, the company that I now work for, Hinsa Performance, had an advert out for doctors to work in motorsport. So I phoned them up and I asked them about this job, but I was asking about wanting to learn more about motorsport in terms of precision and accuracy and what they do. And through very early on, they said they were looking for a doctor to do every single race in F1 to support the existing doctor who'd been doing it for many years. And Hinsa are a company that started by a Finnish orthopedic surgeon called Aki Hinsa, who was Mika Hakkinen's doctor, but just through his presence in the paddock, ended up treating multiple other drivers just on I'm a physician. Physicians help people in difficulty. They've asked me, I'm going to help them. So Hinsa's origins are all in F1 and motorsport. And just when they said they wanted a doctor to do all 24 races, well, that's not me. I'm always going to be a portfolio doctor. I want to do my emergency medicine as well as my sports medicine. And so, I kind of thought that was going to be the end of it. But then conversations continued, and the head doctor said he was going to move on. Actually, he'd done it for a long time and just fancied moving on, which suddenly changed the landscape in terms of what they were looking for. We had quite a few conversations about what I thought and they thought about what modern sports medicine practitioners could bring and what they decided they needed and wanted. And ultimately, after lots of conversations, trying to explore precision and accuracy, and talking around what a job plan would look like, ultimately they offered me the job to do half the races, looking after their pool of clients, which are F1 teams and F1 drivers, which fitted into what I was currently doing across my portfolio. And obviously the pluses for me is a bit like the Football World Cup, completely novel experience. Where did this come from? It's one of those, I always say to my kids, you just got to say yes sometimes and then worry about how you're going to do it afterwards. It seemed to broadly fit into what I was going to do, so said yes, and I'm now 8 months in as the senior medical officer for INSA for the F1 program. We look after some F2 and F3 drivers as well. But I keep saying all the time, I say every conversation I have about F1, well, not to the patients obviously, but to anyone in the system is, but I'm still a novice. I'm still learning, which is true. I'm definitely learning about the sport, and which has been great. Like everyone, I love learning, and I love working with people who think differently than I do. So, especially I've just turned 50, so that's definitely where my outlook is about now, about experiencing different groups of people and different worlds.
No, it sounds really exciting, and them as a company, they look a really interesting company. And so, what was the process like with them? I know that it was circumstantial to some extent, but like, was it? Do they talk about their own internal culture and what they look for in a human rather than just from a medical side?
Yeah, I mean, so Hinson now they've got a large corporate aspect to them in terms of coaching, and they're basically a performance coaching company, a performance orientated organization. So values, they're a Scandinavian company as well, so and which is really interesting, having never worked with Scandinavian population before. But values being a good person, looking after yourself on a high performance level in whatever background you are, whether it's sport or business, is what they do, and what they what they speak about. They run high performance coaching courses to try and develop practitioners along their way of thinking. But the mainstay of what Hints do in sport is they provide the performance coaches for the drivers and the teams, but the drivers in particular. So, performance coach would be, again, a fairly broadly trained but highly specialized practitioner who's got experience in sports science, strength and conditioning, maybe some therapy background in terms of physio, and would coordinate the conditioning and nutrition program. Not quite on a residential basis, but spending a lot of time with the drivers on a one-on-one relationship.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't, hopefully you feel from a previous conversations, I would not have come into it just for the novelty if it wasn't some potential for working with great people and feeling like I would learn a lot. And yeah, the people I work with directly that I've been involved with at Hinsa, from the CEO down through performance director, Pete McKnight, Andy Harrison, Antti Kostas. Just great people, great values, easy to work with, to problem solve, and easy to learn from.
And what is it in particular then about that organization? I know sometimes it is difficult to articulate. I mean, do they have their own actual values listed, or what is it that you find so good to work in?
Yeah, so again, because part of my life is as an A&E doctor, so I deal with a lot of people who have difficult problems in my hospital medical life and in my sport life. Things are a lot easier and a lot more pleasant if you've got people who understand and don't overreact to the patient and the situation. So Hinsa have this mantra, what they call the core, which comes from a book that Antti wrote, which is about it's like a performance lifestyle way of living and way of working and looking after yourself, to get the best out of yourself and be in control of your life. But actually, the people I work with that I've listed, the way they respond to ups and downs of trying to, the way they respond to working together rather than ups and downs of trying to run a global medical service for elite level performers, with lots of good innovation and insight, very little drama, good problem solving approach, and equally able to enjoy it, smile, not be afraid to crack a joke, have a laugh, be just be comfortable with each other. So it's that relationships with the people that I work with, which I find most refreshing, especially because I am a novice, and so I'm going to make mistakes in this world. And just the way they've tried to support me has been brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it's great to be working in an environment where you genuinely feel excited and motivated and driven to do great things and be supported in that way as well.
Yep. Very lucky.
Yeah, no, it's great. And then in terms of getting into this area, then, so you've had a number of different experiences. What would your advice be to people that are looking to get into sports medicine or any area really?
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that I mentor 2 or 3 younger doctors, or two younger doctors, to try and help them kick on. And I suppose the sort of things I would say, certainly from a doctor perspective, you need to get a postgraduate qualification. And there are a load of MSCs out there. There are a load of different qualifications. They're all great, but if you really want to get on in sports medicine, the qualification to get is the membership of the faculty, because that is regarded as the gold standard qualification. Not that the MSCs are not worthless, they're really valuable, but if somebody was at the bottom saying which route should I take, I would point them towards the membership exam. You've got to shadow, you've got to be prepared. I get so many messages, and I'm sure everybody does, from students wanting to do electives or wanting to come and work, at the Warriors or at the Institute and this, that, and the other. And that is great. We could do that all the time. But actually, where you need to be getting your experience is in club sport, lower level sport. Just because that's what, that's not to say we wouldn't take them on, we would, but that's the base of where you need to get your shadowing experience. And once you've got a qualification, you can get insured, and then you can start doing start applying for paid roles and thinking about that. But you've just got to have an attitude of, I'm just going to say yes to this, and then I'm going to find a way to make it happen. One of the people I work with, Victoria Campbell, who she's just been in Trinidad and Tobago for the Youth Commonwealth Games with Scotland. They choose some terrible places for the Youth Commonwealths, and she's the lead doctor for Scotland Women's Rugby. Again, even I go sometimes, how do you fit all this in? But again, because she's just great at saying yes to everything, because she knows there'll be value in it, in terms of learning and experience. And now we're at the point, even though I'm a bit older than her, she might not realize it, but I kind of learn from her experiences as well, just hearing her talk about it and thinking, oh yeah, I remember. Oh, that's interesting how they did that. Yeah, so there's lots of life and learning experiences, but you've got to get qualified and you've got to get the base of your pyramid, and you've got to be flexible. You don't have to go and do higher specialist training in sports medicine to get on in sports medicine, but you do need a relevant base specialty, which GP is probably the most flexible. But equally, emergency medicine at the moment, it's a buyer's market, because it's not necessarily a desirable specialty to people to go in. But there are a handful of people at GB Ajayi in London who's very similar to me, emergency medicine and sports medicine, Steve Boyce in Glasgow. So they're the sort of things that are relevant that I would push people towards.
Great, brilliant. No, thank you for sharing that, and thanks for sharing all the stories. Are you doing parkrun tomorrow?
I will definitely be doing parkrun tomorrow. It's the one consistent bit of personal exercise I can get to do. So I'll be shuffling and wheezing my way around that 5K course.
No, it's great. I've only got into it in the last year or so. My fiance is really into it. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be going to do it. But we go to one. It's about 300 people in pretty much every week. So John Rogers does it and does well.
Surprise, surprise. Is that ex-international runner John Rogers?
Yeah, no, yeah, see him going around a lot. Tom Lancashire does it sometimes. I don't know if you know Tom.
I don't know about who he is.
But yeah, so he's beaten Mo Farah over certain distances. So he's a good mate of mine, and he's but yeah, and I don't like seeing his time.
Yeah, Andy Butcher just turned up at one of the Edinburgh ones a few weeks ago and broke the national record. I'll not be threatening him.
Brilliant. No, well, good luck with that, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for speaking with me.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan.